So I have a 10-year history of putting myself on the agenda at the worst possible time. So now I get to follow Rick talking about Nashville. So you think I'd learn at some point, but good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Bracey. I'm a co-founder of the Future of Music Coalition. I chair the board and serve as policy director. I want to again reiterate our appreciation to New America Foundation for all their work in helping us put on this event, and my thanks to everyone who's come and participated in person, and in particular thanks to everybody who's been watching via the web and following us on Twitter and all those great things. It's been a fun day so far. We're going to spend the next 90 minutes or so talking about a set of issues that are really kind of foundational to why we started the Future of Music Coalition 10 years ago. And you know, now they kind of get, I don't know, pigeonholed as questions around net neutrality or reclassification or you know, things like that. But really, what we think these questions are really much broader, and they're really the whole point of why we formed Future Music. We formed Future Music in part because we felt very strongly that once we had that moment in the 90s when people started to understand the potential impact of digital distribution of music and the magic of MP3 files, we understood instinctively that on the one hand, musicians now had unprecedented opportunities to have global distribution with the click of a mouse and to organize their fan base and reach people in ways that were previously not really conceivable. But we also knew at the same time that the traditional economic structures and business structures of the music community were going to change by definition. And we are particularly concerned that musicians be educated about these changes, understand what's happening with the marketplace, be engaged, have a seat at the table, and particularly make sure that as Washington and as the policy community struggled with a host of incredibly difficult decisions, that musicians had a full seat at the table and were active participants in those debates. We've talked forever about the core goal being the evolution of what we call a legitimate digital music marketplace. And what that means is basically harnessing the potential of technology to create new economic structures that both get music out to music fans in ways that consumers are excited about it, but create value and create revenue sources so musicians can sustain their careers. We also felt from the beginning that the only antidote to an illegal Napster is a legal Napster. And what we mean by that is that that really the solution or a solution for musicians, the challenge is to create sustainable economic models, legitimate licensed services and applications. That it's very hard to police your way out of it. You have to innovate your way out of the problems. We also felt very strongly that innovations would not come from the existing music industry. Of course, there would be some innovation, but that the existing music industry as it existed in the late 90s was not going to hold all the solutions to create these new structures. We also didn't think it was going to come from the internet service providers or from the software companies. It was really going to come from the collaboration of all these different industries working in an interconnected manner to create new, as I said, services and applications that music fans would like. Now, I think, certainly we think that in the last couple of years, you're starting to see that legitimate digital music place take hold. By no stretch are we there yet, but we're starting to get a real sense of what it could look like and certainly what it is looking like at this point. Now, at Future Music Coalition, we also have been extremely wary of gatekeepers. And if you're not in the music community and don't understand the impact of, say, Clear Channel on the industry, then maybe you may not know what we mean by that. But if you look at the story of consolidation in the commercial radio industry, or you look at the integration of Live Nation and Ticketmaster, or you basically look at what happens when you integrate ownership of content with the delivery of content and the potential power of gatekeepers, you understand why musicians are extraordinarily concerned, particularly about the need for an open internet and for continued innovation. We think that there needs to be clear and transparent and predictable rules. We think it's very, very important for the marketplace and for innovation to make sure that people know what's legal, what's not legal. And we have a clearer understanding of who's going to enforce these rules and what these rules are going to look like. We feel like a lack of rules and lack of transparency is going to create uncertainty in the marketplace, which will certainly stifle innovation and will in all likelihood really stifle and have a negative impact on venture capital and the ability for this new marketplace to evolve and develop. So some of the core questions that we're asking today are really pretty basic and pretty fundamental. And again, they've been pigeonholed as questions about net neutrality, but it really goes much broader you know, than the narrow question of how do you protect an open internet and protect innovation. They get to broader questions about how do we facilitate competition in the broadband marketplace, how do we have competition that lowers prices for consumers to access the internet so they may have more disposable income to put into legitimate licensed music services, and of course, as we said, net neutrality is a big piece of this as well. So we're going to do a couple things now over the next 80 minutes or so. First, we are really pleased and somewhat humbled that Austin Schlick, the General Counsel of the FCC, has joined us, and Austin is going to make a presentation to sort of explain where they are now in their process, what they're looking at, what the road ahead for them is, and then Austin is kind enough to take some questions and see if he can clarify some pieces. Then we're going to have a broader panel that's going to unpack these issues in a little bit more detail. Again, looking at these basic questions. What should the rules be? Who enforces these rules? And how are we going to get from here to there? So with that, it is my pleasure to turn the stage over to Austin Schlick from the FCC. Austin.
Good afternoon. Picking up on Michael's theme, there have been some disturbing reports in the last weeks and months about actions by internet service providers that are inconsistent with the principles of openness that we at the FCC believe benefit musicians and consumers and innovators, businesses, everyone. RCN, an internet service provider, has a proposed class action settlement concerning blocking its customers' access to peer-to-peer services. AT&T has a proposed class action settlement concerning failure of honest disclosure about the actual speeds that its internet service provides. Windstream, a small internet service provider, is accused of redirecting users who wanted to use the Firefox browser to go to Google to Windstream's own homepage. But the mother of all such cases, of course, is the Comcast case that was decided by the U.S. Court of Appeals here in D.C. this past spring. And I just wanted to talk very briefly about that case, not to rehash a case that I resoundingly lost, but just to set up the factual and legal predicate for where we are proposing to go in the next weeks and months. The Comcast case involved, again, blocking of peer-to-peer communication, specifically the peer-to-peer uploads, as many, if not all of you know, upload-download speeds are asymmetric, downloads faster than uploads. So in order to compensate for your limitation in a peer-to-peer transaction where you're limited to the upload speed, the slower upload speed, if you draw from multiple computers, then those upload speeds together match your download speed and you get a faster download. A theory would be that video services downloaded using peer-to-peer technologies are a substitute for video services offered by cable television providers, which would include Comcast. And it's fairly obvious that a video-on-demand service competes with internet video services. But for whatever reason, Comcast employed a protocol, a technology which sent what are called reset packets, which would tell the uploading computers that the downloading computer was having trouble receiving the transmission, disconnect, stop the transmission, start again. So it would interrupt these transmissions and slow the peer-to-peer download. The Commission found, after a process that went on for a year and rounds of evidence, that this practice was discriminatory. Not only was it not justified by network congestion or any other reasonable network rationale, but also it wasn't disclosed to customers. And for both of those reasons, the Commission said that Comcast had to stop the practice. Comcast challenged that in court, and in April, the Court of Appeals agreed with Comcast that the Commission lacked authority to require Comcast to stop this practice that the Commission had found to be unreasonable and discriminatory. Which raised the question, why did we think that we could have Comcast stop the practice? What made us think that we did have that authority? And the answer for us, begins with the first section of our statute, which is the Communications Act, which establishes the FCC for the purpose of, in the area of wire and radio communication, which internet services plainly are, promoting efficient and affordable services, non-discrimination, public safety, national security, and these are the fundamental purposes for which we exist, and really everything we do derives from that congressional mission, the congressional statement of our mission. There is a body of Supreme Court precedent which says that the Commission has authority in its field of jurisdiction, that is in the area of wire and radio communication, to take acts that advance those purposes. And we believed that that body of Supreme Court precedent allowed us to require Comcast to stop the disruption of the peer-to-peer communications. Our action in the Comcast case, in turn, was based on the orders, and now I'm going to start getting into the classification mumbo-jumbo, and I apologize, but I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. In 2002 and then 2005, the Commission entered orders which classified internet access services, that is, cable modem service and telephone companies' DSL services. And what we said in those orders was that there is a national interest in deployment of these services, that it's extremely important that we establish rules that promote investment and are not unreasonably burdensome on the providers, but at the same time, we have a role in providing basic consumer protections and being able to step in when necessary to prevent the kinds of abuses that we saw in the Comcast case. And the Commission unanimously, we are a 5-member Commission with 3 members of the President's Party and 2 minority members. In each of those orders, the Commission unanimously said that the right way to approach this is to classify these internet access services as information services. And the effect of that is to take those services outside of the rules that Congress established for telephone-type services, which are called telecommunication services, and put them in an area that Congress created, but for which Congress didn't establish any specific rules. An information service is a service that's within the Commission's jurisdiction, but Congress hasn't established any specific rules. We took them out of the telecommunication service category. The telecommunication services are what's called Title II of the Act. Information services are Title I, which is our general power that I mentioned under Section 1 of the Act to act in the public interest. Title II, 48 sections of very detailed rules about how telecommunication services must be provided. So 2002, 2005, we took the services out of the telecommunications pile, put them in the information services pile, and said, if we see a problem, we will step in, and we believe under the Supreme Court cases that I mentioned, we have the authority to do that. The Supreme Court upheld that approach in a decision in 2005 called Brand X, which concerned the cable modem classification, and 6 justices said this is an area that Congress didn't specifically address. Congress did not tell the Commission how to classify internet access services. Accordingly, it's within the Commission's discretion, and the Commission reasonably exercised its broad range of discretion. 3 justices, with Justice Scalia writing, said, no, the Commission's view that this is all an information service isn't factually correct, that any reasonable consumer who's buying internet access service is going to believe that they're getting 2 things. The first thing they're getting is connectivity, the ability to access the internet. And that is just an ordinary telecommunications service. It's functionally no different from a telephone service. It allows you to send and receive the information of your choosing over that connection that you're buying and paying on a per-month basis your telephone company or your cable company for. The second thing you're getting is the information, some of which is provided by your cable operator or your telephone company. That's the home page that they're providing, and maybe they're offering you an email at Comcast.net or Verizon.net. But those, Justice Scalia said, users understand are different things than the basic connection. The Comcast case held that once we took internet access services out of the Title II 48 rules and put them in the ruleless information services area, we lost our ability to apply rules like the 48 to that service. Essentially, we had to make a choice. We chose information services. Having made that choice, we couldn't go back, at least not in the Comcast case. And that changed the understanding that the Commission had always understood, which was that we could adopt the deregulatory approach and nevertheless come in when needed. So let me stop that history right there and talk about a thing that was happening at the exact same time. This is April 2010, the Comcast decision comes out. March 2010, the Commission releases the broadband plan that Congress ordered us to write and that we spent a year drafting, which had 207 recommendations about how to promote broadband, that is essentially high-speed internet connections, deployment and adoption. And about half of those 207 recommendations are things that the FCC should itself be doing, and those include centrally universal service, the idea that broadband deployment and adoption is something that all Americans have a right to benefit from, that access to the advanced communications networks of the 21st century is something that's necessary for job creation, for education, for democracy and communication. And our belief was that the Universal Service Program, which most of you will know as the 12 or now 15% tax on the bottom of your phone bill, that money goes into the Universal Service Fund and is spent to support telephone service in high-cost areas and for low-income customers. That money should be redirected to supporting broadband. We've now achieved virtually 100% telephone penetration across the country, and it's time for us to move on to the broadband challenge. We also, in that report, identified things like customer privacy, the idea that your private information on the internet is protected against misuse by your provider, as something that, if insured, will promote broadband adoption. So customers will be more likely to use the internet and to invest in connections if they're comfortable that their private information will be kept private. And then things like Disabilities Access. As a general matter, about 2/3 of Americans have a broadband connection. Of the disabled, it's more like 42%. So there's a huge gap there. The telecommunications provisions of Title II speak directly to that and say that telecommunications networks, telephone networks, have to be accessible to the disabled. There's no similar requirement for broadband and internet connections today, and the broadband plan suggested that there should be. So we have these recommendations, and it turns out that under the Comcast decision, as well as under the language of the Universal Service Program, the information services classification that was found wanting in the Comcast case also prevents us from implementing many of these core objectives, core recommendations in the broadband plan. These two come together in April, and that leads to what the chairman has called the third way. That is a proposal that he rolled out about 2 weeks ago now, which is a new legal approach to the classification, this technical problem of information services versus telecommunications services, that would have the effect of putting a strong foundation under the existing policy. And I just want to be very clear that the chairman has strongly endorsed the basic principle that was unanimously endorsed by the Commission over the years and over the last decade, that this is not a service, internet access is not a service that we want to regulate as a traditional telephone service. It is instead a service for which a light regulatory touch is appropriate. That's what we've been doing for a decade. It has generally worked. And the chairman's suggestion was that it is possible under tools that Congress gave us to apply the telecommunications framework to the service, solve the Comcast problem, allow us the authority that Congress always understood we would have to advance those Section 1 goals, efficient service, affordable service, public safety, within the Title II framework, and nevertheless do something called forbearance, which is an amazing tool that Congress gave us to decide not to apply particular provisions of Title II to the service. So Congress, amazingly enough, allowed us to determine in the public interest that we should not apply a provision of Title II that Congress wrote because that would be inconsistent with competition and the public interest in the context of this particular service. The path that the chairman identified, this idea of classifying as telecommunications service to solve the jurisdictional problem and using the forbearance authority to solve the threat of overregulation, is exactly what Congress did for wireless services, for mobile voice services. Congress said in 1993 that these services, commercial mobile radio services, cell phone services, are telecommunications services subject to Title II, but the Commission can and should forbear from applying specific provisions of Title II, except basic protections like the prohibition on unreasonable practices and the requirement that the Commission have jurisdiction to enter orders to enforce that. So that mobile experience, the wireless experience, is one that the chairman believes shows that Title II classification is consistent with investment, development of a competitive market and a new technology. We are about to embark on a process to consider the options for solving the Comcast problem on the one side and implementation of the broadband plan on the other. And that is going to be a public process, a notice and comment process, begun with a notice of inquiry, in which we will ask, are we right in thinking that we have to do something in order to play the role that Congress intended us to play with respect to Internet services? If we are right, are we in fact able to do more than the chairman believes we are able to do under the Comcast decision? Are we missing something about our ability to implement the broadband plan under the current information services classification? If another Comcast case came around, is there something we could do to be upheld in court under the same facts? Alternatively, should we simply say this is a Title II service and treat it like a telephone service? Or finally, is the chairman on the right track in thinking that we can solve both problems through Title II with forbearance? I think it has been very clear since the chairman announced his third way suggestion that there will be extremely strong opposition to any change to the current regime from segments of the industry. And I suppose if I have any message for this group, it's that what we are commencing is something that the chairman described, I think it was about 10 days ago. He said we're at the pre-beginning of this process. And you cannot take for granted that the Commission will end up in any particular place. You certainly cannot stand back and believe that this issue is closed, because it's not. We're quite serious about taking the views of all sides, and if you want to be heard, you're going to need to step up and make sure you're heard, because there are going to be a lot of voices on the other side. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Nothing?
Hi, this is Tim Doyle. I'm a reporter with SNL Kagan. Given the pushback from industry, and yesterday we had news that Congress is looking at new legislation, do you guys still plan to go ahead with the approach the chairman delineated a few weeks ago?
The approach that the chairman suggested is exactly the approach that we're going to take, which is to commence a proceeding to ask the questions which will lead to a decision on how to proceed. We were very clear, and the chairman's statement from a couple of weeks ago was very clear, that what we're going to do is lay out this proposed third way, lay out other possibilities, and ask people who have spent a lot of time thinking about this to tell us if we're on the right track, or again, if we're missing something. So yes, as far as congressional action, there was a letter again about 2 weeks ago from Senator Rockefeller, Chairman Rockefeller, and Chairman Waxman, which pointed to a current need for FCC action, and we take that letter seriously and think that it is appropriate for the Commission to be asking these questions.
Has it been determined whether you're going to appeal the Comcast decision to the Supreme Court?
The time for seeking Supreme Court review goes until July, so I don't want to say never, but I think it's clear from the chairman's statement that the chairman at least believes that the best way to move forward is to deal with the Court of Appeals decision on its own terms, and again to assume that we'll need to act as an agency.
So there's no plans to go back to Congress and say, right, there's no plans at this point to go back to Congress and ask them to rewrite Section 1 in such a way with the forbearance elements left out and whatever, with the specifics, because obviously it was more of a, it seems like you're saying it was more of a generalized authority in Section 1, and it was just so generally written that that the district court interpreted it as anything, basically the district court said anything not specifically termed legal is illegal. So would there be a plan if somehow this approach doesn't work to go back to Congress and ask them to rewrite Section 1?
The agency views itself as a resource to Congress in its legislative considerations and drafting. We, of course, stand ready to implement any legislative change that Congress might enact, but for now we would intend to be as helpful to Congress as we possibly can be to allow it to make an informed decision whether or not it wants to move forward. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah.